Hello and welcome to this week's Sidebar. We're here to discuss episode 12 and the final, well, sort of final episode of season 3 of Proof. I'm here with Jacinda and Kevin. Hey guys.
Hey, Susan.
Hey, Susan.
And in this week's episode, you heard about what we found while working on Scott's case and the evidence that Vandeville's sister had been holding on to, that there was, in fact, like Vandeville said all along, a massive conspiracy in Kalamazoo to cover up evidence and to win a conviction against the 5 Polderman defendants. These documents, when we found them, were truly shocking. Like, this is not something we expected to find. In the abstract, it sounds absurd. It sounds ridiculous that this would happen in real life because it's that outrageous, it's that unethical. But it did happen, and it shows just how desperate they were at this point to try and shore up their conviction in the Polderman case.
I think the shocking thing about some of this information is that it excluded this key person in the case, the person who had been the first suspect, the person who had originally come forward and said they had information about the crime, looking for reward money. It eliminated this person from taking the stand and telling a jury what they knew. And that would be incredibly important in any case, much less the biggest cold case in Kalamazoo County history. Suddenly, this man is taken off of any chance to speak in court. It's just astounding on so many levels. I don't think I've ever heard of a key witness being offered a private attorney to help them in a resentencing matter, and the implication being that if he doesn't testify for any of the defendants that are facing life in prison from a murder that he claims he knows all about. I mean, it was just something that was kind of beyond belief when you let it sort of sink in that that's what is going on here.
And it most obviously affects the Polderman case. I mean, this directly about the Polderman case, but it also is a part of this bigger story of the cold case team. It only happened because of the way the cold case team operated and their past practices. And it seems very much like Vandeville's history with Workema and being an informant is part of what they were so desperate to keep quiet about. They didn't want this whole sordid history to be brought out before a jury and before the public. What's also absurd here is just how many cold cases Vandeville's supposedly connected to. I mean, logic would tell you that it's not possible for one person to just randomly stumble into this many crimes as he has allegedly been a part of or known about.
I think you're exactly right when you're saying it would have a big impact on the Polderman case. But yes, the larger implication with all of this is if Vandeville takes the stand, the entire cold case could essentially be on trial. The cold case team and all of the cases that they've done, and who knows how many other situations that opens up. And that became such a problem for everyone associated with all of these convictions.
And we don't know how many of the cold cases Vandeville allegedly knew, quote unquote, about or gave info on, because again, silent observer, it's kept secret, like it's kept silent. So we can't say for sure how many of the cold cases he played a role in. We just know of the ones that are confirmed by documents. But there's other cases that we have no link, technically, that we know of right now of Vandeville being involved in. But we do know that there were some kind of strange silent observer tips that Workema used in affidavits to like get search warrants. And I would be very curious to find out one day if Vandeville's behind those too. So it could be even more than we currently know of.
Right. And it's something we may never know because the silent observer is so hard to get your hands on.
Well, we're also trying to get more documents still in various cases. In fact, I think it's very possible that there is a link between Vandeville and the Baldwin case and Scott's case that's not been explored yet. We know in the Polderman case, there's references to witnesses connected to Vandeville talking about both cases, which doesn't really make sense in terms of like talking about the murder itself, but could potentially make sense if what's actually going on here is Vandeville was giving tips to both of them all along.
I think one of the things that we've learned throughout the entire season, certainly in Scott's case, and what we've been able to surmise about Vandeville, is that at its heart, silent observer is this wonderful concept that someone can call in and not reveal their identity to provide information about a particular crime that might be helpful and protect them and allow police to move forward. I think what we've also learned is that it presents the opportunity for there to be potential manipulation because there is such little access to it. And there's very little oversight beyond the few people who were associated with it.
And who are usually part of the police department to begin with. And problems with Silent Observer or Crime Stopper or other names it goes by, definitely not limited to Kalamazoo. This is a reoccurring problem across the United States. I've encountered it in several jurisdictions. There are a lot of cases out there involving it. A lot of cases of, it turns out in the end that the people getting the money from Silent Observer were actually the cops themselves. That seems to be a pretty common practice.
In Scott's case, the Silent Observer tips weren't turned over. And then when they were turned over, it became clear that he probably wouldn't have been convicted at all. And then in all of these other cases, it seems very clear that we don't know for sure how many cases Vendeville was involved in, but he suggests that he was involved in several of them.
For most of the cases, we do not have Silent Observer tips. They're not part of the FOIAs, not part of the records. So we have no idea. Most of the cold cases are like Scott's case before they finally got the Silent Observer tips, because we just don't have any freaking clue what's in there. For all we know, in the other cold cases, the answer's sitting right there in the Silent Observer file, and we just have no access to it right now.
And we know that Scott's case started with, a Silent Observer call, but it all starts with, a call from Stacy and her brother-in-law. And that's where that sort of picks up steam. There are so many questions that I feel like she doesn't have exact answers for when she called or when he confessed to her. But yet this was ultimately the first step in starting the case. Now, the cold case team doesn't come along for, another decade plus, but they rely on that information to start it.
And the cold case also began with an unknown, undisclosed tip from an unknown source. We don't know if it's Silent Observer, but we don't know who it is or what it's about. But that's why they reopened the case in the first place. We also know that Vendeville's cousin called in a Silent Observer tip to the cold case team. That's not in the file, never been seen. I mean, there's still a lot of unknowns.
One of the questions I've always had about Silent Observer as simply an observer on my part is this idea of being able to sort of confront your accuser, right? And, this information is used and you always hope that there's further investigation to it, but it does start people looking in particular directions. And you don't necessarily know in all instances what the motivation for that call is. Is it financial? Is it something more than that? Or is it just a genuine, citizen trying to do the right thing, as we saw with some other people calling in tips about Earl O'Byrne's murder? So it does work, but it also has tremendous problems. And in Scott's case, even the people calling in with tips about the car and the blonde man, those just weren't even followed up on. So even though in principle it should have worked in that way, it didn't.
Well, for Vendeville and his tips, we have a pretty good idea of the motivation behind it, financial. He was very interested in getting rewards in various cases, including the Polderman case, which is kind of how this all started, because in 2002, so 2 years after the murder and 5 years before the Polderman 5 were arrested, that's when Vendeville tells Workema, I got info in the Polderman case. Try to, 1, cut a deal on his burglary charges, and 2, get the reward money. And what happens back then in 2002 kind of like sets the scene for what later went on in 2007 with the deal with Brower and Jeff Getting. Because what Vendeville does is he accidentally implicates himself in the Polderman murder by trying to give a tip about Joe, who was banging his girlfriend at the time. But Vendeville doesn't stop there. Vendeville actually suggests Joe Williams killed the Poldermans. He also claims that Joe Williams did the burglary that he's been facing trial for. He's like, oh yeah, I just stood outside and kept lookout while Joe Williams went into the garage and took that purse. He's the one who actually did it. Joe Williams is the one who actually stole it. He's the one who did this crime that I'm facing trial for. But it backfires. Like, Vendeville plays himself there because what ends up happening is, 1, he's convicted of it. And 2, since he has claimed that Joe Williams is part of the burglary, it becomes a multi-offender situation. And his sentencing gets enhanced because of that. So he faces additional years in prison because of his lie about Joe Williams. And at his trial, he actually tried to call Joe Williams as a witness so that Joe could be like, no, I did not steal a purse from this garage with Vendeville. I never did crimes with him. I don't like him. I don't want to be with him. But his attorney wouldn't do it. So the evidence that Vendeville had lied about Joe didn't come out at his trial. And that's part of what motivates Vendeville later on, is he's trying to clarify what really happened in his case and remove that enhanced sentencing for a multi-offender situation. That's part of his motivation in trying to get the truth out about Joe Williams and like why he lied about Joe and how he lied about Joe in the first place. Not just about the garage case, but the Polderman one as well.
Yeah, the whole Vendeville thing, we've heard in so many of the other cold cases, jailhouse informants coming forward and claiming someone confessed to them or claiming they were talking about a crime or whatever. And there's incentives for them to claim that they heard someone confess. Maybe it'll help with their sentence, or maybe it'll help them get to a better prison, or whatever the case may be. But now it makes me wonder, like, how many other people are there out there who have been told, don't say what you have to say, don't come forward? Is Vanderbilt the only one? I don't know. We may never know, like you said.
I mean, it's the kind of thing that it's harder to find because, again, by definition, they're not showing up in the record. They're not showing up at trial. So they're not going to be targeted as much for interviews. I mean, it's just an absurd situation. And then there's the fact that like the story Vindeville tells, like the reason he's supposedly a witness in the Polderman case is also ridiculous and absurd. I mean, the Polderman case is absurd from start to finish. But the idea that Vindeville followed the five killers out on a dirt bike and just happened to see him go into the Polderman house, come on. And the detectives believe it, like, but by all appearances anyway, they hear this and they're like, oh, that's what happened. That's real. It's definitely a story of a true thing that actually happened.
But like Kevin was saying earlier, like if Vanderbilt is saying that and pointing the finger at them, don't they have the right to confront him on the stand about that?
One way or another, this part of the story is minimized to such a degree in the file that the defendants themselves aren't aware of how key this was as part of the cop's story. The defendants, at least some of them, had heard about it because they were interrogated about it. Like the cops go to Vindeville, get the story from him. And some of the defendants they're also interrogating at the same time period, they immediately run to them and say, oh, Vindeville said he saw you go there in person. So they'd heard that at one point, but then it gets dropped entirely from the narrative and never comes up at trial, never comes up again. Like the attorneys don't seem to be aware this is one of the claims being made. And again, we've mentioned in the show, Vindeville's somehow cleared as a suspect after being the lead suspect for 5 years. And there's nothing in the police record that says why. The only clue we have is from one of the trials where Chief Mallory testifies. Andrew's trial is the only one he appears in. And at some point, he makes a comment about how Vindeville has a corroborated alibi proving he was up in Grand Rapids when the murder happened, which, again, nothing in the file back that up. And also, like, if he's in Grand Rapids at the time of the murder, how is he driving out on a dirt bike to see them go to the house?
Right? Doesn't that just blow apart their entire theory of what happened, other than they got 4 of the 5 of them to confess and point fingers at each other?
Yeah, but Vindeville is part of even Brandy's story, because remember, the story she has is that after the murders, they go back to Steger Street. Vindeville's there. They all like tearfully or laughingly confess to him about the murder. And then, according to Andrew, Vindeville then gives instructions on how to perfectly clean the crime scene. So Vindeville's still part of the story in a way, but like this weird after the fact kind of thing.
Right, and he can't be in 2 places at once. So
Who did they talk to that was able to corroborate this alibi if it's real at all? And it also doesn't make sense because at the time that Mallory's describing, like why Vindeville's cleared, it's after they've already decided Vindeville's innocent. Like they say that Vindeville had an alibi he told him about on February 27th, '07, but like we know that at least a month before that, they've already decided he's innocent. So that timeline that Mallory testifies about doesn't fit. That can't be the actual reason they cleared Vindeville. So there's a lot unknown still, but what we do know is that Chief Mallory went to extraordinary lengths to arrange for this deal. And it's also worth mentioning that, like, we say he's the police chief, but like he literally became the police chief 4 days before he went to go see Vindeville in prison because of another massive scandal that like blew up the entire Kalamazoo City Police Department and caused a bunch of senior leadership, including the chief, to be forced out. So they were still dealing with the fallout from that when this happens, which I think is extra motivation for them to avoid a second crisis, second scandal in the form of Workema and his use of Vindeville, because they're already like in a bad spot.
So we started off this season with the full intention of doing Scott's case, and it morphed into something much larger than that, and something that I don't think any of us sort of comprehended all that we were going to uncover. We suspected that there were problems there, but I know that when you two started diving in and then we would have conversations, it felt like every direction you turned, there were more questions about different cases. And it sort of became this unbelievable thing for a period of time while we were starting to put this all together. Like, there's a potential problem with this case, and there's a potential problem with this case. And it turned into so much more than just Scott's story. You know, Scott became the gateway for everything else that we were doing. And he became the impetus for all of these other people to have their story told in a way as well. And there was something, amazing about that for Scott's legacy, because He's not here. He didn't survive more than a couple of days outside of prison, but he's the reason we got into all of these other cases and really started to shout that there is a larger problem here going on than just Jeff's case, than just Scott's case. And I don't think any of us have ever worked on another season or another show that's revealed anything quite like this. I mean, it's all kind of left me stunned to a certain degree.
I mean, I wasn't surprised to find problems with other cold cases, but I was very surprised at the scale of it. If you told me at the start that there was other issues, I would not have been shocked. But it didn't occur to me the problem was this big.
Right. It didn't occur to you that we were going to be talking about half or more than half of the cases we're going to have problems. Jacinda, what was your take when you started getting into the cases and seeing the potential scale of all of this?
Yeah, I mean, like Susan said, I wasn't surprised that there were problems with other cases, but I never expected it to be this big, this broad, and I think it was something about when we first went to speak with Roberto Davanzo's former attorney, who's now a judge, Judge Jaguar. And he's specifically talking about one case, his client, Roberto. And, he doesn't know about the other cases, but his concerns with that case, and he used the word aggressive tactics of the cold case team, like that to me is when it sort of solidified in my mind that we were on the right track.
Yeah, I wasn't there for that interview when you two did it, but I remember speaking to you about it, and then I remember hearing it. And the statement, aggressive tactics, I mean, he's talking about his client's specific case, but it leaves you to wonder what else is potentially going on. Are the same tactics being applied to other cases? Then you kind of sort of hold your breath a little bit as you say, did they take the same approach in other cases? Because there's definite problems in that one.
Right. Like I kept expecting we'd come across someone who's like, no, you guys are wrong on this one. Right. So that wasn't Judge Jaguar. Then we went and talked to Patrick Mitchell's attorney, and it wasn't him. Like,
He was like, I don't doubt my cases. This one, I do. This one, I don't think they got it right.
this is the only one he thinks they got wrong. Like, so I kept thinking we'd find somebody who would be like, all right, you guys are wrong about this one. And it never happened.
It never happened. I will say this. I keep going back to a conversation that I had with the late Detective Mike Brown in 2020. And we were filming an interview with him for the TV show we were doing on Jeff's case. And I don't remember exactly what he said now, like verbatim, but he essentially said that Jeff Titus was capable of committing this crime. And if he didn't commit this crime of killing these two people, he was going to kill somebody someday. And it just sort of took me back. And I remember saying to him, so even if you were to find out that he didn't commit this crime, you're saying he would have killed someone else. And so therefore he deserves to be locked up. Again, I don't remember exactly what he said, but he's basically saying, yeah, like he was a danger.
Yeah, I remember that too, of him saying like, well, he would have done something like this someday anyway.
Right. As a justification for it.
Right. Like they did some sort of public service by locking up an innocent person because maybe someday he would have committed a crime.
And he wasn't saying it in passing, like he was telling me what he really believed and why he really felt one way or the other it was acceptable to lock Jeff up.
Mike Brown was even like, I don't care if Thomas Dillon, the serial killer, was driving past the crime scene when it happened. It was still Jeff.
Right. He said that. That was the first conversation with Mike Brown. The second conversation with Mike Brown, when presented with more specific information about Dillon, it started to click in his mind. Like, I think he said when Jacinda asked him the question, oh, I didn't know that. But it still didn't change his mind on Jeff. And it wasn't just, I'm going to stick with my guns because this is what we went forward with. It didn't seem to matter to Mike Brown if Jeff had done the crime or not, because he thought he was a danger and he was doing a public service. And that comment has always sort of stayed with me. And I thought about that a lot while we were doing this season.
Yeah, it's sort of the same thing that, again, going back to Judge Jaguar was talking about curb appeal, right? it doesn't seem like Mike Brown cared what happened to Jeff, even though Jeff didn't have a record, right? Like there was nothing in Jeff's life that you could point to and say, oh yeah, he's a danger. And nothing like that existed. But in some of the other cold case defendants, they did have records. And it's that same sort of attitude. Well, whatever, like they're not good people. They're dangerous. They could potentially be dangerous. So let's lock them up.
The whole season has left me sort of stunned and sad. And, it started off with Scott and it just sort of expanded. And yeah, as you both said, I'm not surprised that there were other problems there. I'm just surprised at the scale. And I'm surprised by going through the cases and at learning about some of the tactics and some of the decisions and the approach. And I'm surprised by the number of witnesses whose stories changed, a decade after a crime, that their story changes so dramatically. And you're just kind of left stunned and you can't reasonably understand how all of those people were convicted based on all of that. And it just kind of leaves you lacking understanding that we're actually talking about this on this scale.
So where does this go from here? Well, we'll be back before too long with further episodes, both about the cases you've heard about on season 3 and some of the cases you haven't heard about at all yet. In the Polderman case, there's active representation by 2 innocence groups we mentioned in the show. I know they're forging ahead with investigation and efforts to have those convictions reviewed. And we hope that further cold case defendants will also be represented in the future and be able to begin challenging their convictions, because there are many problems that need to be fixed here. And here's another complication. Jeff Forgetting is the current prosecuting attorney for Kalamazoo. Where does that leave these cases? I don't know, because I don't see how he can possibly be in charge of them, given his role in the Vindeville deal. Incidentally, he was also the attorney for one of the cold cases, Corky Lard. So the idea that his office should be in charge of reviewing and deciding the outcome of these cases, especially the Polderman case, I'm not sure that's going to fly. So what happens from there, I have no idea. But it's a giant, giant mess that needs to be addressed. And at this point, I don't know what that's going to look like.
Yeah, one of the things that I want to point out to everyone, Olivia Vigiletti, Scott's attorney and the attorney for Polderman defendant Joe Williams, said in this episode, I want all the listeners to take it to heart, that there has to be public attention and outcry about these cases, right? So if you're listening and you like the podcast, ask other people to listen to it, talk about it. These are the ways that things get done, right? Like when we were all in Rome working on that case, the community really became unsettled by the things that were discovered. And, the Kalamazoo community has to speak up about it too. It can't just be us. And I think that it's important for people to spread the word, demanding that these cases be looked into further.
So that is goodbye for now, but only for a little while. Stay subscribed, stay looking at your feed, because, like I said, it won't be long before we're back again with more updates, because there are more problems with the cold case team that we have not had a chance to cover in our show. And what happened to those cases needs to be exposed as well.
You've been listening to Proof Sidebar, a podcast by Red Marble Media in association with Glassbox Media. Send us your questions and comments at proofcrimepod@gmail.com. Follow us everywhere with the handle @proofcrimepod and on our website, proofcrimepod.com. Thanks so much for listening.